Then you before time, I might be able to do so. Well, my friends have always told me, be sure that you don't lose your cool or your dignity. But I was way up in Portland, Oregon, and I knew they couldn't hear that program in Alabama, so we lost our cool and battled back to Florida, and finally one of these questions said, Governor, you sound as if you think you're the smartest man in the country. And I said, no, I'm not the smartest man in the country. I'm not the smartest man in Oregon. I'm not the smartest man in Alabama, but I'm the smartest man on this television show here. Have all the issues in this campaign, but I have more of the issues of the average citizen of Florida and the country than does any other candidate. And I feel for the support of the people, regardless of who they happen to be, of this great state. And I entered this campaign because I wanted the people like you to have some representation. I wanted you for once to have your desires and aspirations spoken about. And as you know, since this campaign started, some of the candidates are sounding as if they live in Orange County. Some of the candidates now sound as if their speeches are written here. And that reminds me of what happened in 1968, when you folks came out to hear us in that campaign. I was invited to the Gridiron Dinner in Washington, D.C. And the President was there, Mr. Agnew was there, and Mr. Humphrey was there. And there was people like Mr. Ted Kennedy, there was Jim Carter, there was the Joint Chiefs of Staff, there was the ambassador from Great Britain, from Russia, there was the Supreme Court of the United States, and the cabinet of the President. I don't think anybody in the whole group that supported me, except maybe the piano player, the orchestra, or Rich, I think they played Dixie one time. But anyway, he was supposed to make sophisticated fun at each other. It's very difficult to make sophisticated fun at the President, especially him sitting next to you, or to your right, but that was the name of the game, and it was done in good humor and fun. And I was the first speaker. And I said, Mr. President, Mr. Chief Justice, I spoke in Florida at Q Auditorium in Miami 2 weeks prior to accepting the Republican Convention's nomination. And after I made my speech to 20,000 Floridians there in Q Auditorium, I lost my speech. I misplaced it. I couldn't find it. But after listening to your acceptance speech 2 weeks later in that same city, I see you found my speech there. Taking positions that they never took before. They've taken positions that right opposite the way they voted in the Congress of the United States. Why? Because you, the average citizen here in Florida, said you're fed up, like Mr. Brinkley said you were. We are fed up with bureaucracy. We are fed up with liberalism that has given us disaffected youth, and in instances, crime and violence in the street, terror addiction wherever you go, and people marching up and down the street saying, we want the communists to win in Southeast Asia, and they say that's permissiveness and that's academic freedom, and that's a new way. Ethical, moral values of the worth ethic has been destroyed by these liberals, and the average citizen says, I want them back, and you are going to start getting them back after the 14th of March here in the state of Florida, because one candidate said, well, I knew law and order before Governor Wallace could spell it. Well, he's been up in Washington about 20 years. Why didn't he do something about it while he was up there? My friends, they are today making statements that they never made before, and I have the highest personal regard for every single one of those who are involved in the race, and I speak about their politics only. I'm also in this race because there are many issues and positions that you wanted put to the National Democratic Convention. A party that used to be the party of the average citizen, a party that used to represent those who are here tonight, but it has been taken over in the past by the liberal intellectual snobs who look down their nose at every average citizen and says, we know best what to do for you and your child and your money, and we're going to tell you what to do. And the average man in Florida now says, as you are assembled here tonight, we are through and fed up ourselves, and we want to write some of our own guidelines about our future, about our money, and about our children. The average citizen in this country knows that the only way to prevent World War III is to have a strong defensive and offensive capability. They know that we ought to have a strong... They know that we ought to have a strong space program, and I'm for the space shuttle, and I'm for the Skylab, and you know the reason it had to be cut? Because all of these liberal senators who are down here were voting to give most of your money away to countries who spit on us in the United Nations and help our enemies down in Southeast Asia. The only way that you can guarantee that no World War III comes about is to be so strong that they'll always want to talk with us and do nothing else with us. And anybody that thinks that anybody will and anyone who thinks that anybody will disarm, if we disarm and show them how good we are, my friends, they ought to have their heads bored for the hollow horn, because there's something wrong with them. All of us long and pray for the day when we can disarm. But until we are sure of the intentions of the Soviets and the Chinese, we must base our defensive and offensive capabilities not upon their intentions, because no one at this time knows about the intentions of the Soviets or the Chinese. But we know their capabilities, and they are strong and high. And therefore you will send a message back to the party and to the Republican Party to correct the President's own Blue Ribbon Panel report. You know, he had some people to make an inspection recently, a study, and they made an addition to it. And you know what they said? They said this country has lost its position of overwhelming superiority, that we either on a equality with the Soviet Union or we are below. And that bodes ill for this country, so they say. And I heard Mr. Joseph Alsop, who, by the way, wrote a column yesterday that it looks like we will have as many delegates as any candidate, including the so-called leading candidates in the country, at the convention. But he said someday we might have one world government in the sense, not through the United Nations necessarily, he said, but because we will be overwhelmed by might of another nation and would have to do at their whim. That's what Mr. Alsop, a respected columnist, has written in this country. So I want you to send the message to the Republicans and to the Democrats and to the leaders in our Congress that the average citizen is worried about our national security, and that he recognizes that we can negotiate only through strength, that you can never negotiate through weakness, and at the present time, that's about what we have to do. That's a message I hope you will send them. My friend, the other issue that I talked about in '68, and I didn't find anybody talking about it in '68, but every one of them are talking about the tax structure now. And you heard what Governor Carter read, what he said, that one of the candidates said up in Annapolis, Maryland the other day, and in the National Governors Conference, that one of the candidates said, we ought to grab these issues. We shouldn't be timid and ashamed. We ought to have attacked these issues like Governor Wallace has attacked them. And I'm talking about the tax structure. We are arriving at April 15th time when you pay your income tax, except those that have it withheld. And I tell you that the income tax is so unfair and regressive to the average citizen, working man, and businessman in this country that it's about to obliterate the middle class. And we want to send them a message that we want some tax relief for the average man in this country and in this state. And we want... You say, how can you get tax relief? I'll tell you how you can get it. When they plug up the loopholes in the tax structure that I talked about in 1968 right here in Orlando, Florida,
What no one else talked about it until late in the campaign. They alluded to it briefly because they knew that we were talking and hitting upon something that was beginning to irritate and trouble and frustrate the average middle-class citizen who has a hard time getting ahead. Did you know that there is $200 billion of income and wealth in this country that's tax exempt because they wrote the laws in their favor after they passed the income tax law? And the reason your income tax is so high, you businessmen, you organized labor members, and every other average citizen, including the elderly, is because you are paying the share of those who own and control the $200 billion of wealth and income in the foundations and church commercial property and other endowments. And we passed a resolution at the Southern Governors Conference the other day in Atlanta, introduced by me unanimously, that same things that I've been saying a long time. So I want you to send this message back to the National Democratic Party that they had better think about the income tax that today is grinding, as I said a moment ago, the middle class in our country almost into virtual non-existence. Yes, the issue of taxes has now been taken up by these other candidates who used to talk about other things. And now I ask the question about them. You are so interested in tax reform now, my friends, you who are running from the United States Senate, why didn't you do something about it? And why didn't you recommend these same recommendations while you were there on the floor of the United States Senate all these years? Why did you wait to come down to this campaign in Florida? And I'll tell you another thing, one reason the space budget had to be cut, probably. You go to Washington, as a governor has to go, and you look as far as the eye can see, and there's buildings and buildings and buildings and $30,000 to $40,000 briefcase-toting bureaucrats walking in and out, just like bees in a hive. They don't even know what they are there for themselves. And every governor, when he sits around and talks privately, he says, no wonder we cannot get money in the states to carry on the necessary functions of government. Look at all these bureaucrats. What do they do? I bet if you opened the briefcases of the bureaucrats, that half of them would have only a peanut butter sandwich in them. That's all you'd find in them. My friend, that's the same group of bureaucrats that take over the school system in Washington, and after they take it over, then they run over to Maryland or Virginia to get away from it. That's what they do. That's the same kind of folks. And more pluperfect hypocrites in that crowd up there in Washington than any place I ever saw. And as a governor, I know that administrative costs do not have to keep barreling upward each and every year. Administrative costs. And my friends, it's going to break every one of us if something's not done about it. Now, another issue that we ought to talk about, because I tell you, these issues are shaking them. I was at the governor's conference the other day. I was at the caucus of the 30 Democratic governors. And you know, a few years ago, when I was governor the first time, they used to shy away from me. They didn't want their pictures made with me. They're afraid it might get back in the papers in Ohio, Michigan, or someplace. But you know, I don't have any trouble having my pictures made with governors from those states now. Not at all. Not at all. They even, in the caucus the other day, they were even asking me my advice. I said, well, you listen to me in the issues. Yes, my friends, they are changing. The political arena is where you do change, and that's the way it's being done. But I tell you, the matter of law and order, they've talked about law and order all of these years. You cannot walk on the streets of your nation's capital. You must hide in the hotel lobby. Don't get outside, they say. Be careful if you go into an elevator alone, ladies, and be sure don't walk any place after dark outside of this hotel. That's in the supposedly most civilized capital, or the most civilized country in the world, that you cannot walk without fear of bodily harm. And if you get knocked in the head tonight when you walk out here from this arena, the person who knocks you in the head will be out of jail by some federal judge edict before you get to the hospital. And you know, and on Monday morning they'll blame a policeman about it. They'll say and you know, some of my friends in the news media, personal, not political, I don't think, they sometimes say, well, that's sort of a simple statement about it. Well, it's simple, but it's true, isn't it? Don't you read it in the paper every day where folks, a person gets in jail, burglarizes a house, he's out, he burglarizes 2 more, he's out, he burglarizes 3 more, he's out, and then he shoots a policeman in Miami. And then he shoots a policeman in Jacksonville. That happened not long ago here in your own state, because these federal judges have taken over and they have decided upon themselves to be despots in most instances. And I tell you, when I started talking about federal judges, these big papers like the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Baltimore Sun said you ought to be more respectful of judges. I said, well, why don't you be respectful of me? I'm an elected official of Alabama, and you talk about me. What's wrong with that? I tell, if they can't stand hot grease, they ought to get out of the kitchen, because, my friends, I can tell you, I can take it, and we can dish it out also. You know, but these judges, my friends, they've about destroyed the Constitution of our country. And Thomas Jefferson and all the rest who wrote it did not mean for them to govern and legislate. They meant for them to adjudicate and use judicial restraint, and I want you to send the message. Not that this is going to happen, but it's an educational program beginning within the political arena. I want you to send the Democratic Party this message, that we want in the platform, whether we get it this time or not, that we want the confirmation of all Supreme Court judges brought up every 4 or 6 years again before the Senate. And these district judges that have more power and authority over your life and your money and your child than all your elected representatives do, we want them elected by the people in the districts in which they live. Let them be elected. Yes, we're starting an educational program on that. And you know, it'll be just like busing. When you get enough people upset about it, they'll do something about it. They're trying to do something about busing, and I told you that something would be done, in my judgment, after the election on the 14th. I'll get to that in just a moment. I have something special to say about that. But you know, another issue, I've always been for aiding the elderly and the blind and those who need help, especially those under Social Security. Have you noticed all of these candidates now who are in the Senate are so concerned about the elderly? They want to increase the minimum that I advocated many years ago and let them earn more. Well, why didn't they provide that when they were there in the Senate all these years? Why did they have to come to Florida and find a state with 900,000 people over 65 years old to become suddenly aware of the income of the recipients on Social Security? But I can tell you why they couldn't do anything for those under Social Security. Not only have they mismanaged the trust fund, but they had taken the money in the general treasury, and what did they do with it? I said long ago as a governor, and other governors say it too, that we want to help those who need help. But I saw where 1,270,000 people are on welfare in the city of New York. And when they check, they find out that some own 4 or 5 times under 4 or 5 different names, and you're paying for it. They find where others are making $1,000 a month in the heroin racket. You go to California and the same thing happens. It's going to break every middle-class taxpayer, every city, every county, every state in the union if something's not done. Why, one of the grand jurors in New York State last year said that over $1 billion in one particular program went down the drain stolen. $1 billion, that's your money. It ought to have been used for the elderly, for pollution problems and environmental problems in this state and the country, and for national defense. It went down the drain. So I want you to send a message back that we want a sane, sensible welfare program, but we are tired of paying people to loaf in the sun who won't work and never have wanted to work and been drawing your money all of these years. And I'm sure that every person of every race knows that I'm talking about those who made it a profession, as we've indicated by the investigations they occasionally make in some of the larger metropolitan states of our country. Now, what is the other matter that we've talked about for so long? We have told you, and you told me, and you told the people in the Congress, that if we kept giving our money away, that someday we were going broke. But not the smart folks who write our guidelines. They said, no, the more money you give away to foreign countries, the richer you're going to get. Well, you were right. We're about broke. $212 billion in foreign aid, including the interest, has gone to other countries since 1946. I'm not against all the foreign aid that we spent. The rehabilitation of Western Europe and Japan stabilized the free world. I'm not against the humanitarian relief we gave for flood victims and famine victims. No, not at all. But my friends, I can think of one nation that received $10 billion of your money in the last 12 years, and every time her leaders arise in the United Nations, they say the United States to have a reasonable program and to tell the parties and those in government that we're not going to give any more of our money away, especially to those countries who spit in our face in the United Nations and say that we are an aggressor and an imperialist country. You know, this primary has the politicians in the party buffaloed, because I ran in some primaries before. This is not the first time I've been involved in a Democratic Party primary. I ran in 1964 in Wisconsin, and I received 34% of the vote in a two-man race. And I went down to Indiana and received 30% in the two-man race. And when I went to Wisconsin, they said he'll get 5% of the vote. The governor said it'll be catastrophic if he gets 100,000. Well, on the night of the election, we received 34% of the vote and nearly 300,000 votes. 3 catastrophes in one night in Wisconsin 8 years ago. And then we went to Indiana, and 30% of the vote in a two-man race. Now there are 12 in the race. So even with the new math, you see how that worries the leadership. If he got 34 in a two-man race, while 34% would be way high. You can win the primary on less than that. And already the Democratic leaders in Michigan say we have 25% of the vote, and if they give us 25, it must be more, and that's leading in Michigan already. And we went to Maryland 8 years ago, and I didn't speak to as many people in the entire campaign in either state as I'm speaking here tonight in Orlando. And I received 43% of the vote. And that night of the election, I've told it many times, but listen again because it actually happened. I was leading up till about 9:30. They called the mayor of Baltimore to the television and asked him what he thought about George Wallace leading in a race in the free state of Maryland. Well, you know what he said, because he was one of these big-time politicians that kowtow to the exotic. And so he said, it's sad. We'll never live this down. If we live another 1,000 years, it'll be our saddest and darkest hour here in the free state of Maryland. What has come over the people of the state of Maryland? Well, if he had gone out and asked a shipyard worker or a taxi driver or a little businessman or a policeman or a fireman or a beautician or a barber, they could have told him what was happening even 8 years ago to the average citizen. But they don't ask people like that. They don't ask people like that. They ask, as I said in 68, some pointed head pseudo-intellectual who's overeducated for his brain capacity who can't even park his bicycle straight on a college campus. That's who they are. And those are the kind of people who have written guidelines about your children and about your money. They write the court orders for the judges, and they write the decrees for HEW and the Justice Department. And the average citizen is going to tell them that we believe in quality education for everybody. But my friends, get back to Maryland. That night, I was leading up until about 9:30, and so they made a request for a recapitulation of the vote. I was sitting there with the New York Times and Milwaukee Journal and Baltimore Sun and all the rest of those fellows who, you know, are down here right now watching us. And I said, "What is recapitulation?" And they smiled because they said, "Well, we've got him. He doesn't know." They said, "You'll find out soon." And sure enough, the head recapitulator of Maryland came on the television. And he said, "We have recapitulated the vote because they asked us to recapitulate it. And after we recapitulated it, Governor Wallace is now running second. He's behind." I'm still not sure what it's all about, but if anybody ever tells you they're going to recapitulate on you, you better watch them, because they're going to do something to you. My friends, our anti-recapitulation forces are the average citizen who is here tonight with us in Orlando. Yes, quality education. I said 10 years ago, that if we didn't stop the federal takeover, we'd have chaos in the public schools throughout the country. And sure enough, you see what is happening. We accepted, and you accepted, a non-discriminatory practice of freedom of choice. Let people go to the school of their choice. They said it's fine. Then the next year they said it's not working. Why, we asked? Well, because not enough people on this side chose to go on this side of town, or this side of the county, on this side of the county. We said, well, they could have chosen if they had wanted to. They have a right to. What you going to do about it? They closed this school down, and they bust these little children to Kingdom Come across the county. In my own state, I said in the beginning that we had 84 little black children and 7 little white children that were bused 48 miles one way in the morning and 48 miles back, 96. And the Newsweek man went down and rode the bus with the little children going to sleep, getting on before dark, and he said, "You were wrong. It was 56 miles. Some of them have to go one way, and 56 miles back. 33 one way and 33 back, and 21 way and 20 back across the city, backwards and forwards to Kingdom Come. And 50 years from now, the American people will look back and say how callous were those in our government to bust little children and trifle with their health and safety as they've done in the year 1972. My friends, yes, the matter of busing little children is asinine, it's senseless, it's cruel, and it's callous. And I told you, as I said, that Mr. Nixon will make a statement if I run well. And after this primary, as you know, they say they're going to talk about busing. They're waiting to see what you're going to do, mainly on the candidacy of George Wallace, because the biggest jolt that you can give the busing folks and those in our government is to vote for George Wallace. Now, I want to tell you... Somebody asked me about the representative in the House who was running on a news conference the other day, Representative Chisholm. They asked me what I thought of her, and I said, well, we don't necessarily agree on everything, and yet I heard her talk the other day about tax reform, and we do agree. But I want to say for her that she is a candidate that says the same thing in New York that she says in Florida. Whether you agree with it or not, she says the same thing on the House floor that she says in Florida. She doesn't speak one way in Washington and another way in Florida. Whether you agree with it or not, you'll have to agree that you like people at least to give a straightforward position, whether you agree with it and you know where they stand. But since this busing matter's come up, and I want you to listen to this, I've used it on statewide television and on nationwide television. All 6 of these United States senators who are here in Florida running in the primary campaign had a chance last year to vote against busing. They voted opposite Senator Childs and Gurney and Senator Holland during his life when he was there. There was an amendment in the Senate of the United States to prohibit the busing of little children to achieve racial balance. All 6 of these United States senators voted against the amendment or announced against it, which meant they were in favor of busing. And now some of them tell you they are against busing. As my United States Senator Allen says, I only wish they had been with us against busing when we needed them, and they hadn't gone to Florida. They had found out before they went to Florida and could have stopped busing. So when they get on the television and tell you they are against busing, I tell you categorically, and no one can dispute it, no newspaper, no television, that they all voted for busing or announced in favor of it in the congressional record. And there it is right there. Now, my friend, the second vote they took, opposite Childs, Gurney, and Mr. Holland when he was there, was on neighborhood schools. All 6 of them voted against neighborhood schools. All 6. Not a one voted in favor of neighborhood schools. So any senator who tells you over the television and radio or in an ad he's for neighborhood schools, ask him why he didn't vote for neighborhood schools when he had a chance to in the Senate. He didn't know you'd ever find out, but you did through me, you know.